He turned slowly, his reflection ghostly in the glass. Sharp suit, sharper eyes. Cold. Always cold. "You're late," he said without looking at the man who just entered. Dr. Ellis, his chief geneticist, hesitated in the doorway, clutching a tablet like a shield. I thought you'd want to see this in person." Daniel finally turned. "Then speak." Ellis swallowed. "The latest batch of prenatal screenings. There's an anomaly in your wife's file." A flicker, just a flicker, crossed Daniel's face. "Gone in an instant." "Clarify. The embryo implanted 3 months ago. It doesn't match your genetic markers. Not even close." Silence stretched like a wire pulled taut. Daniel walked to his desk, poured himself a glass of whiskey, neat, no ice, and didn't drink. His hand trembled just once. "Are you certain?" "Triple verified. The lab ran it blind. No contamination. No error." Daniel's voice dropped, low and dangerous. "Then she lied." "I don't think she used someone else's sperm." Daniel cut in, his voice cracking like ice under pressure. "She went behind my back. After everything I've given her. After everything I've built." He slammed the glass down. It didn't break, but the sound echoed like a gunshot. You see, Daniel hadn't just built a company. He built a fortress against the shame of his past. His father, a failed academic, had called him genetically mediocre, a disappointment in a bloodline that prized intellect above all. Daniel had sworn he'd never pass on weakness, never create a child that wasn't perfect, that wasn't his. And now, this. He walked to the window again, staring down at the glittering streets below. Somewhere out there, Clara was probably smiling, dreaming of a nursery, of tiny fingers and first words. Did she think he wouldn't find out? Did she think he'd just accept it? "No," he whispered, more to himself than to Ellis. No, she knew. She knew exactly what she was doing. His phone buzzed. A photo notification. Clara, standing in their sunlit garden, hand resting on her barely swollen belly, eyes closed, face turned to the sky. Peaceful, hopeful. Daniel's chest tightened. Not with love, with betrayal. "Cancel her access to all company accounts," he said, voice flat. "Freeze the joint assets, and get her out of the penthouse by morning." "But Daniel, she's pregnant. Where will she go?" "That's not my concern," he said, turning away. "She made her choice. Now she lives with it." Outside, the storm worsened. Thunder rolled like judgment. And in that moment, Daniel Hartwell didn't feel like a magnate. He felt like a boy again, abandoned, unworthy, broken by blood. He didn't know it yet, but in 3 years, that same blood, her blood, their children's blood, would haunt him in ways no DNA sequence ever could. For now, though, there was only the cold, the control, the lie he told himself, that love could be engineered, and that betrayal could be erased with a signature and a security detail. But deep down, beneath the steel and the spreadsheets, something fractured. And it wouldn't heal until he stood face to face with 3 small strangers who carried no trace of him, yet held the power to undo everything he thought he knew about family, worth, and the fragile, beautiful mess of being human. Certo, agora tu como narrador e storyteller disinvolva a historia sem marcacos com o nome de cada topico que for disinvolve. Mi conti sobrio topico tu com dialogo como su fosso espectador. Sempre lembrando de disinvolver com vida moco. Com vidos sentimentos de forma que a estrutura de narrativa utiliza uma linha temporal linear de modo o espectador sentir o que o personagem está sentindo amigos. Com 6.000 characters when 3, max the morning sun spilled through the bay window of the penthouse kitchen, painting golden stripes across the marble counter where Clara Mendez stood, hands wrapped around a steaming mug of chamomile tea. She wasn't drinking, just holding it, like warmth might seep into her bones and quiet the ache that had settled deep in her chest over the past year. She used to love mornings like this, back when she still wore a lab coat, when her days were spent decoding the poetry of human genes, not folding tiny onesies in silence. But she'd left all that behind when she married Daniel. "For the greater good," he'd said. "Your brilliance belongs beside me, not buried in a research lab. And she'd believed him. She'd wanted to believe him. Now, she stared at the pregnancy test on the counter. 2 pink lines, undeniable, miraculous. Her breath hitched. "Daniel?" she called softly, voice trembling with hope. He entered moments later, already dressed for a board meeting, cufflinks gleaming like ice. His eyes flicked to the test, then to her face. Not joy, not wonder, assessment. "You're sure?" he asked, voice clipped. "The test is positive. I've confirmed it with blood work." He didn't touch her, didn't smile, just nodded slowly as if calculating risk. "We'll schedule the full genomic screening tomorrow. Embryo integrity is non-negotiable." Clara's stomach dropped. "It's not an embryo anymore, Daniel. It's a baby. Our baby. Our genetic legacy," he corrected gently. But the word legacy hung in the air like a contract, not a promise. She remembered that night vividly, the night she'd finally gathered the courage to speak her truth. They'd been in his study, rain tapping the windows like secrets trying to get in. "Daniel," she'd begun, twisting her wedding ring. "The fertility specialist said, even with IVF, your sperm count is critically low. There's less than a 2% chance of viable conception." He'd gone very still, too still. She'd reached for his hand. "There are other ways. Donor sperm. Adoption. We could." "Adoption?" He'd laughed. A short, bitter sound. "You want to raise someone else's genetic mistake? Someone with unknown predispositions? Unknown weaknesses? It's not about weakness," she'd pleaded, tears welling. "It's about love. About building a family." "A family built on lies isn't a family," he'd snapped. "It's a compromise, and I didn't build an empire to compromise." That was the moment something in her broke. Not loudly, but quietly, like a thread snapping inside a tapestry. She'd smiled through tears, nodded, and walked away. But inside, a decision had taken root. Now, standing in the sunlight with his child, their child, she hoped. She felt both terrified and defiant. Later that week, alone in the clinic, she signed the consent form for donor insemination. The donor was anonymous, screened, healthy. But more than that, he was kind. The profile mentioned he played piano for children's hospitals. That detail had made her cry. She never told Daniel. Not because she wanted to deceive him, but because she knew the truth would destroy everything before it even began. She thought maybe when he holds the baby, he'll understand. Maybe love will rewrite his logic. But love, she would soon learn, doesn't always speak louder than DNA in a man who worships genes like gods. For now, though, she pressed a hand to her belly and whispered, "I'll protect you, no matter what." Outside, the city buzzed with ambition and noise. But in that quiet kitchen, Clara Mendez, a woman who once mapped the human genome, was learning that the Daniel threw himself into work with a ferocity that bordered on self-destruction. Late nights at Genovate, emergency board calls at 3 a.m., anything to avoid the growing swell of Clara's belly and the questions it silently posed. But the truth was coiled inside him, venomous and secret. It had started with a routine executive health panel mandatory for all Genovate leadership. Daniel never skipped it. Control, after all, began with the self. But when the results landed in his encrypted inbox, he stared at the screen for 10 full minutes, unmoving, as if time itself had stalled. Sperm count, 1 million/ml. Motility, non-viable. Genetic fragmentation, severe. Sterile. The word echoed in his skull like a death sentence. He deleted the email, then the backup, then ordered the lab tech who processed it reassigned to a remote facility in Iceland for operational efficiency. The memo read, but deletion couldn't erase the shame. Festered. One night, unable to sleep, he stood in the doorway of their bedroom, watching Clara sleep, one hand resting protectively over her stomach. Moonlight silvered her skin. She looked peaceful, whole, fertile. He backed away, fists clenched. The next morning, over espresso and silence, he said, voice carefully neutral, "Have you scheduled the embryonic DNA verification yet?" Clara stirred her tea, not meeting his eyes. It's already done. The clinic sent the report. His pulse spiked. And she hesitated just a fraction of a second too long. Everything's normal. That pause. That tiny fracture in her voice. It was all he needed. Later, alone in his private lab beneath Genovate's headquarters, Daniel reran the analysis himself. Cross-referenced Clara's embryo sample with his own genome. The algorithm blinked red. Less than 0.01% match probability. His hands shook. Not because he doubted the science, he was the science, but because the implications were catastrophic. If the embryo wasn't his, and he was sterile, then Clara had known. She must have known, and she'd gone ahead anyway, with someone else's seed. In his wife, in his home, in his future. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was biological. A violation of the very code he'd sworn to protect. He stormed into their bedroom that evening, eyes blazing. "Who is it?" he demanded, voice raw. Clara froze, a baby blanket halfway folded in her lap. "What? Don't play innocent. The DNA doesn't lie. Whose sperm did you use?" Her face paled. "Daniel, I can explain." "Explain what? That you deceived me? That you planted another man's child in my lineage like some genetic Trojan horse?" Tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't want to hurt you. I tried to talk to you about donor options, but you shut me down. You called adoption a compromise. I wanted a child, our child, in every way that matters." "In every way that matters?" He let out a hollow laugh. "You think love matters more than blood? More than legacy? You've contaminated our line with unknown variables. Disease risks, cognitive flaws. God knows what recessive horrors you've invited into this family. I chose a screened, ethical donor," she cried, standing now, voice trembling but fierce. "He's healthy, kind, brilliant. Everything you claim to value. And I did it because I love you, because I wanted to give you what you couldn't have. But you were too proud to admit you needed help." The words hung between them like shattered glass. Daniel stepped back as if struck. Not by anger, but by something worse, exposure. She'd seen his weakness, and instead of shielding him, she'd worked around it. Without him, "You had no right," he whispered. "I had every right as your wife," she shot back. "But you don't see a wife, you see a vessel. A genetic incubator." He turned away, jaw clenched so tight it ached. "Get out." "What?" "You heard me. Pack your things. You're not staying under my roof carrying another man's children." "Children?" Her voice cracked. "It's one baby, Daniel." He didn't correct her. Didn't tell her the ultrasound tech had quietly noted possible multiples that morning. He just walked out. And in that moment, Daniel didn't just abandon Clara. He abandoned the part of himself that might have learned to love beyond the double helix. He told himself it was strength, control, purity, but deep in the hollow of his chest, where no algorithm could reach, a truth pulsed like a dying star. He was terrified, not of the unknown DNA, but of being unworthy of the love that had tried, desperately, to include him, even when his body said no. Inside, under the flicker of neon and the smell of burnt coffee, she pressed her hands to her stomach and whispered, "We're okay. We're going to be okay." She didn't believe it. Not yet. But she would. 3 months later, alone in a rented room above a flower shop, Clara lay on a narrow bed, contractions gripping her like iron bands. She'd refused to go to a hospital, afraid Daniel's name, his influence, would find her. Instead, she'd saved every dollar for a certified midwife, a quiet woman named Rosa with hands like warm earth and eyes that had seen 1,000 births. "You're having more than one," Rosa said calmly during the final ultrasound, her voice low with awe. 3 heartbeats. Clara froze. "Triplets." Rosa nodded. "Strong, healthy, ready." Panic flared. How would she manage? How could she raise 3 children alone with no income, no safety net? But then she felt it. 3 tiny kicks, almost in rhythm, like a secret language only they shared. And in that moment, fear gave way to something fiercer. Resolve. The labor lasted 18 hours. When the first cry pierced the air, a sharp, indignant wail, Clara sobbed with relief. Then came the second, softer, like a sigh, and the third, loud and bold, as if announcing their arrival to the world. Rosa placed them on Clara's chest, one by one. Sophia, with Daniel's sharp brow but Clara's gentle mouth. Matteo, dark-eyed and watchful. And Lila, already reaching for her mother's finger with a grip like destiny. "They're perfect," Rosa murmured. Clara kissed each forehead, tears streaming. "Yes," she whispered, "they are." But even in that sacred hush, a shadow lingered, because she knew Daniel would never believe they were his. And technically, they weren't. Not by blood, but by choice, by sacrifice, by the 1,000 nights she'd stay awake just to hear them breathe. That had to count for something. Weeks passed in a blur of diapers, lullabies, and sleepless dawns. Clara took a job teaching biology at a public high school, using her real name but keeping her past buried. She told neighbors she was a widow. It was easier than explaining abandonment. Easier than admitting the father of her children had chosen DNA over love. One evening, as she rocked Lila to sleep, Sophia toddling at her feet and Matteo napping in a crib nearby, her phone buzzed. A news alert: Genovate CEO Daniel Hartwell denounces genetic fraud in high-profile divorce. Her blood ran cold. She clicked. The article quoted Daniel at a biotech summit. "When trust is broken at the genetic level, the foundation of family collapses. I will not be complicit in the normalization of biological deception." No names, but everyone knew. Clara turned off the screen, heart pounding. He wasn't just moving on, he was erasing her, rewriting their story as a cautionary tale about ethics, when the truth was far messier. He'd been too broken to accept help, too proud to admit imperfection. She looked down at Lila, now asleep in her arms, lashes like feathers against flushed cheeks. "You'll never know him," Clara whispered. "And maybe that's a gift." But even as she said it, doubt flickered. Was it fair to deny them a father, even a flawed one? Would they one day ask why he wasn't there? Would they blame her? That night, she wrote a letter. Not to Daniel, but to her children. "If you ever read this, know this: you were wanted more than anything. Not because of your genes, but because you are you. And if your father couldn't see that, it was his loss, not yours." She sealed it in an envelope marked for Sophia, Matteo, and Lila, "When you're ready," and tucked it into a shoebox beneath her bed, alongside their birth certificates and the only photo she kept of Daniel. Taken before the coldness set in, when his eyes still held something like hope. Outside, the city hummed on, indifferent. But in that small apartment, 3 tiny lives pulsed with resilience, love, and a secret that would one day collide with the man who thought DNA was destiny. And Clara? She kept going. Not for him, not even for herself, but for them. Because every time Sophia laughed, Matteo reached for her hand, or Lila whispered "Mama" in her sleep, Clara knew. She hadn't just given them life. She'd given them a chance to redefine what family truly meant. He wore his armor. Charcoal suit, silver cufflinks, expression carved from ice. "I am here today," he began, voice steady, "to address a personal matter that has been weaponized against the integrity of genetic science." A murmur rippled through the crowd. 3 months ago, my wife, Clara Mendez, underwent fertility treatment using an embryo that was presented to me as genetically ours. It was not. Independent verification confirmed 0 paternal match. She knowingly implanted foreign DNA into our lineage without consent. This is not just betrayal, it is biological fraud. The words landed like stones in still water, sending shockwaves across headlines within minutes. Back in her Brooklyn apartment, Clara heard the news from a student's phone buzzing with alerts during lunch break. She stepped into the empty hallway, heart hammering, and watched the clip on a cracked screen. Biological fraud. The phrase gutted her. She didn't cry. Not then. She walked back into class, taught photosynthesis with robotic precision, smiled at a girl who asked about chloroplasts, and only when the final bell rang did she lock herself in the staff bathroom and press her forehead against the cool tile, shaking. That night, As the triplets slept, she sat at the kitchen table, staring at her reflection in the dark window. The world now saw her as a deceiver, a liar, a woman who'd tricked a titan. But no one knew the truth. She'd begged him. She'd offered solutions. She tried to build a bridge over his pride, and he'd burned it before she could cross. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something fear, hope, instinct made her press accept. Clara. His voice. Cold. Final. Daniel. Her own voice sounded foreign, thin. You saw the press conference. I did. You had one job, he said, each word a shard of glass. To uphold the integrity of this family. Instead, you turned it into a genetic experiment. I carried your dream, she whispered fiercely, even when you couldn't carry it yourself. Silence. Then quieter. You used another man's seed in my home, in my wife's body. That's not a dream. That's theft. Tears spilled over. It was never about replacing you. It was about including you. But you were too afraid to be imperfect. I'm not afraid, he snapped. I'm precise. There's a difference. Precision without compassion is cruelty, Daniel. Another silence. Longer this time. She could hear his breathing tight, controlled. I filed for full legal separation, he said. All assets frozen. You'll receive a modest settlement, enough to disappear. Do not contact me again. And do not, under any circumstances, attempt to involve me in the child's life. That door is closed. It's children, Daniel, she said, voice breaking. Triplets. 3 of them. A beat. Then nothing. He didn't react. Didn't ask names. Didn't flinch. Just, goodbye, Clara. The line went dead. She sat there for hours, the city lights blinking outside like distant stars that refused to guide her. When Sophia cried in the next room, she moved on instinct, changed her diaper, rocked her gently, hummed a lullaby her own mother used to sing. But inside something hardened. Not bitterness, not hatred, resolve. If he wanted her gone, she'd vanish. Not because she was ashamed, but because her children deserved peace. A life untouched by his obsession with purity. A world where they were loved not for their code, but for their laughter, their curiosity, their tiny hands reaching for hers in the dark. The next morning, she packed what little she had, changed her number, and moved again, this time to a quiet town upstate, where no one knew the name Hartwell and where triplets were just triplets, not scandal, not science, not sin. She enrolled them in a small preschool under her maiden name, took a job at the local library, planted flowers in a tiny backyard, built a life stitch by careful stitch. And Daniel? He returned to his empire, his labs, his sterile perfection. But in the quiet of his penthouse, late at night, he sometimes found himself staring at an old photo. Clara, years ago, laughing in sunlight, hand resting on her stomach before everything shattered. He told himself he felt nothing, but the truth was he couldn't sleep. At home, the triplets filled every corner with noise and light. Sophia, bold and quick-witted, could recite the periodic table by age 4. Mateo, thoughtful and watchful, spent hours sketching birds in a worn notebook. Lila, the dreamer, sang to her stuffed rabbit in a language only they understood. They knew nothing of Manhattan penthouses or biotech empires. To them, Daddy was a word in storybooks. Never asked for, never missed, because Clara's love was so vast it left no room for absence to ache. But sometimes, in the hush of bedtime, Lila would whisper, "Mama, do stars have mommies too?" And Clara would hold her tighter, heartbreaking and healing all at once. "Yes, sweetheart, and they watch over us, even when we can't see them." She never spoke ill of Daniel, never painted him as a villain, but she never lied either. When Sophia once asked, "Why don't we have a dad like Emma?" Clara had knelt, brushed hair from her daughter's eyes, and said softly, "Some families are built with 2 parents. Ours is built with one who loves you enough for 10. It was enough, for now." One rainy afternoon, as Clara graded papers at the kitchen table, the triplets playing quietly on the rug with wooden blocks, her phone buzzed, a rare intrusion. It was Rosa, the midwife, voice urgent. Clara, there's a gala in the city next week. The Global Science Ethics Forum. Daniel Hartwell is the keynote speaker. Clara's pen stilled. So, they're honoring community educators. Your name was submitted, you won the regional award for STEM outreach. They want you to accept it in person. Her blood ran cold. I can't. You should, Rosa insisted gently. You've hidden long enough. Those kids deserve to see their mother shine. And maybe it's time the world saw them too. Not as scandal, but as proof that love builds families better than any lab ever could. Clara looked at her children, Sophia stacking a tower impossibly high, Matteo steadying it with careful hands, Lila clapping with delight. They were radiant, whole, unbroken. She took a breath. Okay. The night of the gala, she dressed simply. A deep blue dress, no jewelry but the silver locket her mother gave her. The triplets wore matching outfits, fidgeting in the back seat of the rental car as they drove into the city. Are we going to see real scientists, Mama? Matteo asked. We are, she said, gripping the wheel. And you're going to meet some very important people. She didn't tell them who might be there. Couldn't bear the thought of preparing them for a ghost. Inside the grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Pavilion, crystal chandeliers cast golden light over tuxedos and gowns. Clara kept the triplets close, hands linked, hearts pounding. She accepted her award with quiet grace, voice steady as she spoke of curiosity, resilience, and the beauty of questions without answers. Then she turned, and there he was. Across the room, near the champagne fountain, Daniel Hartwell stood frozen, glass halfway to his lips, eyes locked on her, and on the three small figures clinging to her dress. His face went pale. His breath caught audibly, even from 20 feet away. Clara heard it. He took a step forward, then another, stopped. The triplets, sensing tension, pressed closer to her legs. Sophia looked up. Mama? Who's that man? Clara's throat tightened. She didn't answer, couldn't, because in that moment time collapsed. The rain-slicked sidewalk, the sterile lab, the press conference, the silence of 3 years, all of it funneled into this single, unbearable second. Daniel's gaze swept over each child, lingering on Sophia's sharp brow, Matteo's watchful eyes, Lila's soft smile. Recognition flickered, then confusion, then something deeper, devastation. He hadn't just seen triplets. He'd seen what he'd thrown away, and for the first time in his life, Daniel Hartwell looked lost. Clara didn't run, didn't hide. She met his eyes, and in that silent exchange, 1,000 unspoken words hung between them. I raised them alone. You called it fraud. They are perfect. Do you see them now? The room blurred around them. Music faded. Guests became shadows. Only the 4 of them existed, mother and children, and the man who once believed blood was everything. Now staring at 3 living hearts that carried none of his, yet somehow held the power to shatter him completely. And as Lila tugged Clara's hand and whispered, Mama, he looked sad. Clara knew. This wasn't an ending. Clara saw him coming. She didn't flinch, didn't shield the children. She simply stood taller, one hand resting protectively on Lila's shoulder, the other holding Sophia's. Matteo watched Daniel with the quiet intensity of a scientist observing a rare phenomenon. Daniel stopped a few feet away. The air between them crackled with everything unsaid. You look well, he finally managed, voice rough, unfamiliar even to himself. Clara's eyes didn't soften. They're beautiful, aren't they? He swallowed. How old? 3. Just turned. She paused. You missed their first steps, first words, first day of preschool, first nightmares, first time they called me Mama in unison. Her voice didn't waver, but each word landed like a stone in still water. You missed it all, Daniel. He flinched. I didn't know there were 3. No, she said softly. You never asked. A silence stretched, thick with regret and something sharper. Grief for the years stolen by pride. Sophia tugged Clara's dress. Mama, is he the scientist? Clara hesitated. He used to be. Daniel crouched slightly, Not too close, not invading, just enough to be at their level. His voice, when he spoke, was quieter, stripped of the CEO's steel. "What's your name?" Sophia studied him, fearless. "Sophia, this is Matteo." She pointed to her brother, who gave a small, solemn nod. "And that's Lila. She sings to bugs." Lila beamed and immediately began humming a tuneless melody, swaying slightly. Daniel's throat closed. He hadn't expected this ease, this light. He'd imagined anger, tears, accusations. Not joy, not normalcy, not children who didn't know they were supposed to hate him. "You named them beautifully," he murmured. Clara's expression didn't change. "I wanted names that meant something. Sophia, wisdom. Matteo, gift of God. Lila, night beauty. They're not just genetic sequences, Daniel. They're souls." The word souls hit him like a confession. He'd spent his life reducing humanity to data points, and here were 3 living refutations of everything he'd believed. He stood slowly, hands in his pockets to keep from reaching out. "Can I see them again?" Clara's eyes searched his face. Not for lies, but for sincerity. "Why?" "Because I need to understand," he said, voice breaking. "Not the DNA. Them." She studied him for a long moment. Then, quietly, "They have school tomorrow, but there's a park near the library on Saturdays. They feed the ducks." It wasn't an invitation. It was a test. He nodded once. "I'll be there." As he turned to leave, Lila called out, "Mister, do you like bugs too?" He stopped, looked back, saw her holding up a ladybug on her palm, eyes wide with hope. And for the first time in years, Daniel Hartwell smiled. A real, fragile thing born not of control but of wonder. I think I'm learning to," he said. He walked away, but his mind was already racing. Who were they? Where had she lived? How had she survived? And most haunting of all, why did they feel like home, even though they carried none of his blood? That night, back in his penthouse, he didn't sleep. He sat at his desk, staring at the Genovate logo on the wall, the double helix that had once been his religion, and felt it crumble inside him. By dawn, he'd made a call. No luxury, no staff, no penthouse views, just a modest house with peeling paint, a rusted swing set, and a life built on presence, not privilege. At the bottom of the file, a single sheet. Subject resides in Maple Hollow, New York. Works as high school biology teacher and part-time librarian. No romantic partners. No financial assistance from external sources. Self-sufficient. Community well-regarded. Children enrolled in public preschool. All 3 exhibit advanced verbal and cognitive development. No health issues reported. Daniel read it twice, then a 3rd time. He'd expected hardship, maybe even resentment, but this was peace. A life not just survived, but lived with warmth, with purpose, with love that didn't need his name, his money, or his DNA to thrive. His hands trembled. That evening, against every instinct of control, he drove to Maple Hollow. He didn't go to her house, didn't knock. Instead, he parked down the street from the elementary school and waited. At 2:45 p.m., the bell rang, and there they were. The triplets burst through the doors like sunlight breaking through clouds. Sophia leading, Matteo adjusting his backpack, Lila skipping, her yellow rain boots splashing in puddles despite the clear sky. Clara followed, calling out, "Lila, those boots are for rain." But she was smiling. Daniel stayed in the car, engine off, breath fogging the window. He watched as she knelt to tie Matteo's shoelace, then lifted Lila onto her shoulders, making her squeal with delight. Sophia held her mother's hand and chattered nonstop, gesturing wildly as if explaining the theory of relativity. They walked home like that, laughing, bumping into each other, utterly ordinary, utterly whole. He didn't follow, didn't approach, just watched until they disappeared inside the little blue house with the sunflower garden. Back in the city that night, he sat in his silent penthouse, the investigator's file open on his lap. He picked up his phone, scrolled to Clara's old number, still memorized, and hovered over call. He didn't press it, Instead, he opened a new email. To the board of Genovate. Effective immediately, I am suspending all non-consensual genetic verification services. Furthermore, I propose the creation of the Mendez Ethics Initiative, a foundation dedicated to supporting families navigating fertility with dignity, transparency, and compassion. He hit send before he could change his mind. Then he poured a glass of whiskey but didn't drink, just held it, staring at the city lights. She'd stood by the fireplace, arms crossed, voice barely above a whisper. Daniel, there's something we need to talk about. He'd looked up from his tablet, impatient. If it's about the IVF cycle, I already approved the next round. It's not about approval, she said, turning to face him. It's about options. He frowned. We have a protocol. Stick to it. No, she said, firmer now. The protocol isn't working. Your sperm quality, it's declining. The doctor said even with ICSI, the chances of a viable embryo are less than 3%. He'd gone very still. Not angry, worse. Humiliated. Like she'd peeled back a layer he'd spent a lifetime sealing shut. And, he'd asked, voice tight, and there are other paths. Donor sperm, adoption, surrogacy with a donor embryo. We could, adoption. He'd laughed. A short, brittle sound. You want to raise a child with unknown genetic history? No medical pedigree, no cognitive baseline. That's not building a family, Clara. That's gambling with legacy. Her eyes had filled then, but she didn't look away. Legacy isn't just genes, Daniel. It's values, love, presence. Presence without biological continuity is sentimentality, he'd snapped. I didn't claw my way out of nothing to raise someone else's genetic experiment. She'd flinched as if struck. Then, quietly, what if I told you I'd rather have a child who's loved than a child who's perfect? You'd be naive, he'd said coldly. Perfection isn't vanity. It's responsibility. To the future. To the line. She'd stared at him for a long moment, as if seeing him for the first time. Then she'd nodded once and walked out. He'd never brought it up again. Never asked how she felt. Never considered that her silence wasn't agreement, but grief. Now, standing in the empty hallway of his penthouse, the memory clung to him like smoke. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass of the window, eyes burning. He'd called her naive, but she'd been brave. While he'd hidden behind data, she'd faced the terrifying truth that love doesn't require permission from chromosomes. That family isn't inherited, it's chosen. And she'd chosen to try anyway, even when he refused to stand beside her. The next morning, he drove to Maple Hollow again, not to watch, but to act. He parked near the town library, heart pounding like a teenager on a first date. Through the window, he saw Clara shelving books, her hair pulled back, sleeves rolled up, humming softly. The triplets were at preschool, but a drawing taped to the circulation desk caught his eye. 3 stick figures holding hands under a lopsided sun. My mama is the best scientist. It read in wobbly letters. He stepped inside. The bell above the door chimed. Clara looked up. Her smile faded the moment she saw him. Daniel. Her voice was guarded, but not unkind. I didn't come to upset you, he said quickly. I just needed to see where you work. She studied him, arms crossed. Why? Because I realized something, he said, stepping closer, voice dropping. That night, when you talked about donor options, I didn't hear you. I heard weakness. But you weren't weak, Clara. You were offering me a way in even when my body said no. And I slammed the door. Her eyes glistened. I tried to tell you I'd love you no matter what. I know, he whispered, and I punished you for it. Silence settled between them, thick with regret. Then, from the back room, a small voice, Mama! They both turned. Mateo stood in the doorway, backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes wide. He'd been picked up early fever, the note said. Clara knelt. Hey, sweetie. Not feeling well. He nodded, then looked at Daniel. Are you the man from the gala? Daniel's breath caught. I am. Mateo tilted his head. You looked sad. I was, Daniel admitted. I still am. But seeing you helps. Clara didn't stop him when he crouched down. Didn't intervene as he gently pressed the back of his hand to Mateo's forehead. Checking for fever, yes, but also making contact. A bridge. He's warm, Daniel said softly. Does he take children's acetaminophen? Clara nodded, surprised. Yes, I have some in the car, he offered. And elderberry syrup. It helped Sophia when she had a cold last winter. He added, then froze, realizing he'd been watching long enough to know their illnesses. Clara's expression softened, just slightly. You've been watching us. Not to intrude, he said quickly. To understand. To prepare. For what? For the day you let me be more than a stranger. She looked at Mateo, then back at Daniel. You can't just walk back in, Daniel. They're not a project to fix. They're children with hearts. I know, he said, voice breaking, and I don't deserve them, but I want to try, not as their father by blood, but as someone who wants to earn the right to care. Mateo, leaning against Clara, reached out a small hand, not to Daniel, but toward the drawing on the desk. That's us, he said simply. Me, Sophia, Lila, and Mama. Daniel looked at the crude crayon figures. No fourth person, no shadow, just 3 children and their mother, under a sun that shone only for them. Daniel didn't approach. Not yet. He stood by the path, watching. He saw how Clara's voice softened on certain words, how she paused to let them ask questions, how she never rushed, never snapped, never checked her phone. He saw how she kissed Lila's scraped knee without being asked, how she adjusted Mateo's crooked hat, how she laughed, really laughed. When Sophia dramatically declared herself Duck Queen of the Realm, this wasn't performance. This was devotion, and it shattered him, because he'd once believed love was conditional, earned through perfection, maintained through control. But Clara's love was unconditional, messy, relentless. It didn't demand genetic proof. It simply was. He took a breath and walked forward. Clara looked up. Her expression didn't harden, but it didn't soften either. Guarded, waiting. Hi, he said, voice quieter than he intended. Hi, she replied. The triplets turned. Mr. Daniel, Lila cried, scrambling to her feet, crumbs flying. She ran to him, stopping just shy of his shoes, eyes wide. Did you come to see the ducks? I did, he said, crouching again, this time without hesitation. And I brought something. From his coat pocket, he pulled 3 small paper bags. Sunflower seeds. For the birds. And he opened one to reveal a tiny, hand-carved wooden duck. Smooth, painted with care. I made this last night. It's for you, Lila. Her eyes lit up. You made it. I did. It's not perfect, he admitted. I'm still learning. She took it gently, cradling it like treasure. It's beautiful. Sophia marched over, arms crossed. Did you make one for me too? Daniel smiled faintly. I did, but only if you promise to teach me how to be Duck Queen's advisor. She considered this, then nodded solemnly. Deal, but you have to bow. He bowed deeply and she giggled. A sound so pure it made his chest ache. Mateo hung back, watching. Daniel turned to him. And for you, I brought this. He handed him a small field notebook, blank pages crisp and white. For your bird sketches. The paper's acid-free. It'll last. Mateo's eyes widened. He ran his fingers over the cover, then looked up. You remembered I draw birds? I remember everything, Daniel said softly. Clara watched from the bench, arms wrapped around herself, not out of cold, but protection. Her heart was a battlefield. Hope warring with fear, longing clashing with caution. Later, as the children chased butterflies near the swings, Daniel sat beside her on the bench. Silence stretched, comfortable yet charged. You're different, she finally said. I'm trying to be. Why now, after 3 years of silence? He looked at his hands, once used to sign billion-dollar deals, now stained with wood shavings from carving toys late into the night. Because I saw them, he said quietly. And I realized I didn't lose a genetic legacy. I lost them, their first laugh, their curiosity, the way Lila hums when she's thinking, the way Mateo notices everything, the way Sophia argues like a lawyer at 4 years old. He turned to her, eyes glistening. I didn't just abandon you, Clara. I abandoned the best parts of myself I never knew existed. She swallowed hard. It's not that simple, Daniel. You can't just show up with wooden ducks and expect to be part of their lives. I don't expect anything, he said. I'm asking for a chance to earn it, one Saturday at a time. She looked at the children, her whole world, and then back at him. They don't know about the past, about the press conference, about any of it. I know, he said, and I'll never burden them with it. Whatever happens between us, they deserve innocence. She studied his face, searching for the old arrogance, the cold calculation. But all she saw was humility and grief and something new, tenderness. Just then, Sophia tripped and fell, scraping her knee. She didn't cry, just sat there, stunned. Daniel was on his feet before Clara could move. He knelt beside Sophia, pulling a clean handkerchief from his pocket. Let me see, he said gently. She let him, watched as he dabbed the scrape, his touch surprisingly careful. Does it hurt? He asked. A little, she admitted. He met her eyes. You're brave, Sophia. Braver than I ever was. She tilted her head. Why? Because you fall, and you still run. She thought about that, then stood, brushing dirt off her pants. Want to see me run again? He smiled, a real one. I'd love to. As she dashed off, Clara whispered, You're learning. He didn't need to ask. He saw it in her eyes. The past had returned, claws out. On his screen, the headline glared like an accusation. Genevieve exposed. Internal documents reveal systematic DNA manipulation for elite clients. His stomach dropped. He clicked. The article detailed how, for years, Genevieve had altered prenatal and ancestry reports for wealthy clients, erasing markers for hereditary diseases, inflating intelligence predictors, even fabricating genetic compatibility scores for arranged marriages. Whistleblowers claimed Daniel personally approved the protocols. And then there it was, archived footage. His own voice, sharp and unforgiving, from the press conference 3 years ago. Biological fraud is not just betrayal. It is a collapse of truth itself. The irony was brutal. He'd condemned Clara for one act of genetic concealment, while running an entire enterprise built on mass deception. His phone rang. Clara. He answered on the first ring. Clara? Did you see it? Her voice was tight, controlled, but he heard the tremor beneath. Yes. Reporters are already calling the school. Someone leaked that the triplets are mine. That we're connected. She paused. They're calling me the woman who exposed Hartwell's hypocrisy. He closed his eyes. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't stop cameras from showing up at my door, Daniel. Sorry doesn't protect my children from headlines calling them products of genetic fraud. Again. The word again cut deeper than any accusation. I'll shut it down, he said, voice hardening. I'll hold a press conference. Take full responsibility. No, she interrupted. You won't drag them into your redemption arc. They're not props in your story. He flinched. Then what do I do? Protect them, she said simply, even if it means disappearing again. That night he didn't sleep. He sat in his study, the weight of his own lies pressing down like stone. He'd spent years believing he was the guardian of genetic truth, only to realize he'd been its greatest corrupter. By dawn, he'd made his decision. He called his legal team. File for immediate dissolution of Genevieve's consumer DNA division. Transfer all client data to independent forensic auditors. And issue a public statement. I am stepping down as CEO, effective immediately. Then he drove to Maple Hollow. He found Clara in the backyard, pulling weeds, her face streaked with dirt and exhaustion. The triplets were inside, napping after a day of hushed voices and drawn curtains. She didn't look up when he approached. You shouldn't be here. They traced the whistleblower, he said quietly. It was Dr. Ellis, my former chief geneticist, the one who told me about the embryo. She finally met his eyes. Why? Because I fired him after he questioned the ethics of our client customization program. He's been waiting 3 years to bury me. She let out a bitter laugh. Poetic. I deserve it, Daniel said. But you and the children don't. He reached into his coat and handed her an envelope. New identities. Off-grid. A safe house in Vermont. Fully funded. Untraceable. Go. Now. Before the storm hits. She stared at the envelope like it was a live wire. And what about you? I stay, he said. I face it. Every lie. Every cover-up. I'll tell the truth, even if it destroys me. Tears welled in her eyes. Why are you doing this? Because for the first time, he said, voice breaking, I understand what really matters. Not legacy, not control. Them. He nodded toward the house. And if protecting them means I vanish from their lives forever, then that's the price I pay. She didn't take the envelope. Instead, she stepped closer, searching his face. You've changed. I'm trying to. She was silent for a long moment. Then softly, running won't fix this, Daniel. Hiding won't either. They deserve to know the world is messy. But that love can still win. Before he could respond, the front gate creaked. A news van rolled to a stop at the curb. Cameras unfolded like hungry insects. Clara's breath caught. Daniel stepped in front of her instinctively, shielding her with his body. Go inside. Lock the door. But she didn't move. She stood beside him, shoulders squared, voice steady. No, we face it together. He looked at her, really looked, and saw not the woman he'd abandoned, but the woman who'd built a family from nothing. And in that moment, he knew running wasn't the answer. Truth was. Clara took a slow breath. She could hear the triplets in the green room down the hall. Sophia humming, Lila whispering to her stuffed rabbit, Mateo flipping through a bird guide. Daniel was there too, waiting, having insisted on staying close in case they asked for me. She'd almost said no, but something in his eyes, raw, terrified, resolute, had made her relent. Because silence, she said, voice clear despite the tremor in her chest, has been used as a weapon against me and against my children. The camera zoomed in. You were married to Daniel Hartwell, the man now accused of manipulating DNA data for profit. Yet you conceived triplets using donor sperm without his knowledge. Some say you committed the very fraud he's now being exposed for. A beat. The air thickened. Clara didn't flinch. What I did wasn't fraud. It was hope. She leaned forward, eyes blazing now. Not with anger, but with a fire forged in years of quiet endurance. Daniel wanted a child with his DNA. I wanted a child with his love. When his body couldn't give us the first, I prayed his heart would embrace the second. But he chose science over soul. He called my choice biological deception. As if love needed a genetic receipt to be valid. She paused, voice softening. My children aren't products of fraud. They're miracles of courage. Carried them alone. Raised them in a town where no one knew our name. Taught them that kindness matters more than chromosomes. That curiosity is holier than perfection. The interviewer shifted. But don't you think the public has a right to know the truth about their origins? The truth. Clara's voice rose, trembling with emotion. The truth is, my son Mateo stayed up all night drawing constellations because he wanted to show me how big the universe is. Sophia stood up to a bully who called Lila weird and made her a friendship bracelet instead. And Lila sings to flowers because she believes they listen. Tears glistened in her eyes, but she didn't look away from the camera. That's their truth, not their donor ID, not their genetic risk score. Their hearts, their choices, their love. That's what makes them who they are. She took a shaky breath. And if Daniel Hartwell built an empire on lies, that's his burden to bear. But don't you dare reduce my children to footnotes in his scandal. They are not his redemption. They are not his shame. They are mine. And they are perfect, not because of their DNA, but because they are human. The studio fell silent. Even the crew stopped moving. Then, from the green room doorway, a small voice, "Mama!" All heads turned. Lila stood there in her yellow rain boots, clutching her stuffed rabbit, eyes wide at the bright lights. Behind her, Sophia and Matteo peeked out, holding hands. Clara's composure cracked. She stood, rushed to them, knelt. "Sweetheart, you weren't supposed to come out." Lila pointed at the camera. "Were you talking about us?" "Yes," Clara whispered, brushing hair from her daughter's face. "I was telling the world how much I love you." Lila beamed. "Good, 'cause we love you more." The camera kept rolling, unplanned, unscripted, real. And in that moment, the narrative shifted. Not because of exposés or boardroom scandals, but because of a little girl in rain boots who didn't know she was supposed to be ashamed, and a mother who refused to let the world define her children by anything less than their light. Later, as they left the studio, Daniel waited by the car, face pale, eyes red-rimmed. "You were incredible," he said hoarsely. Clara looked at him, then at her children climbing into the back seat, already laughing about the shiny room. "I didn't do it for you," she said quietly. "I did it for them." "I know," he replied. "But, thank you." She hesitated, then added, "The world will still talk, but now they'll also see them." But after the interview, after watching Clara defend their humanity with such fierce, unshakable love, he'd been haunted by a question he couldn't silence. What if, by some impossible twist, they were mine? It wasn't hope. It was desperation. A final, selfish grasp at biological absolution. He'd called in a favor from a retired Genovate lab director, someone who owed him and who'd sworn secrecy. "Just run it," he'd said. "Blind analysis. No names. Just truth." Now the results were ready. He picked up the report with hands that hadn't trembled since he was a boy hiding from his father's disappointment. His eyes scanned the columns. STR markers, allele matches, probability scores. Paternal match probability, 0%. Not one. Not even a sliver. He read it again and again. Nothing. No shared Y chromosome. No overlapping SNPs. No genetic echo of himself in their blood. He should have felt relief, closure, proof that Clara had, in fact, used a donor just as she'd said. That his abandonment, however cruel, had been logically justified. But instead, a hollow ache spread through his chest, deeper than shame, sharper than regret. Because the truth was worse than betrayal. It was clarity. They weren't his, and they never would be. And yet, he thought of Sophia's defiant chin when she declared herself Duck Queen. Matteo's quiet focus as he sketched sparrows with scientific precision. Lila's habit of pressing her palm to his forearm when she wanted his full attention. Like she could feel his thoughts drifting and gently pulled him back. None of it was in his DNA, but all of it lived in his heart. A knock at the lab door startled him. "Daniel." Clara's voice, soft, cautious. He hadn't told her he was doing this, but of course she knew. She always knew. He opened the door. She stood there in a worn sweater, eyes red-rimmed, arms crossed like she was holding herself together. "You ran the test," she said. Not a question. He nodded, unable to speak. She stepped inside, glanced at the report on the counter, then back at him. "And no match." His voice was flat, dead. She didn't react with anger, not even sadness, just a quiet understanding that cut deeper than any accusation. "You needed to know," she said. "I needed to believe I hadn't lost everything," he admitted, voice breaking. "That maybe biology had given me a second chance I didn't deserve." She walked closer, stopping just an arm's length away. "Daniel, listen to me. You didn't lose them because of DNA. You lost them because you chose perfection over presence. But that doesn't mean you can't find them now. Not as their genetic father, but as someone who chooses to show up." He looked at her, eyes burning. "How? After everything I've done? After calling you a fraud? After walking away? By letting go of the need to own them," she said gently. "Love isn't a patent. It's a promise. And promises are kept with time, not blood." He turned back to the vials, 3 tiny lives reduced to data points. Then, slowly, he picked them up and placed them in a biohazard bin. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Erasing the last place I tried to measure them," he said. "They're not samples. They're children." She watched him, silent, as he sealed the bin and wiped down the counter. Then, quietly, "There's a school play next week. Sophia's a tree. Mateo's a narrator. Lila's... well, Lila's a butterfly who forgets her lines but dances anyway." She met his eyes. "You don't have to come, but if you do, come as you. Not as a magnate, not as a father by law or blood. Just as someone who wants to see them shine." He swallowed hard. "Will they want me there?" "They don't know about the test," she said. "They don't care about DNA. They care if you laugh at Sophia's jokes. If you notice Mateo's new drawing. If you save Lila a seat." He nodded, tears finally spilling over. "I'll be there." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Daniel." "Yes. The greatest miracle isn't in the code," she said softly. "It's in the choice to love anyway." And with that, she was gone. Daniel stood alone in the sterile lab, the hum of machines filling the silence. For the first time, he didn't reach for data. He reached for his phone. Clara had seen him, nodded once, didn't smile but didn't look away either. Now, as the lights dimmed, Daniel's hands clenched in his lap. He wasn't here for redemption. He was here because Clara was right. Love wasn't proven in labs. It was shown in attendance. The play began. Sophia delivered her lines flawlessly. Mateo's voice carried calm authority. Lila forgot her cue entirely. But when the music swelled, she danced anyway, arms wide, face lit with pure joy. And in that moment, something inside Daniel shattered. Not from grief, but from awe. These children weren't his by blood, but they were his in every way that mattered now. After the final bow, parents surged forward with flowers and praise. Daniel hung back, unsure. Then Lila spotted him. "Mr. Daniel!" She barreled through the crowd, wings flapping, and threw her arms around his waist. "You came!" He knelt, stunned. "I wouldn't miss it." Sophia marched over, hands on hips. "Did you like my tree?" "It was the strongest tree I've ever seen," he said sincerely. Mateo approached more slowly, holding out a folded piece of paper. "I drew you a bird. It's a red-tailed hawk. They're loyal." Daniel took it, throat tight. "Thank you, Mateo. I'll keep it forever." Clara watched from a few feet away, arms crossed, but her eyes were soft. Later, as they packed up drawings and costumes, Daniel helped Lila untangle her wings. "Mama says you're learning to be nice," Lila said matter-of-factly. He paused. "I'm trying." "Good," she said, patting his cheek. "'Cause nice people get cookies." He laughed. A real, unguarded sound. And for the first time in years, it didn't feel like a performance. On the walk to the parking lot, Clara fell into step beside him. "You stayed for the whole thing," she said. "I did. No checking your phone. No leaving early." "No," he admitted. "I was present." She looked at him, really looked. "Why?" "Because I finally understand," he said quietly. "I spent my life chasing genetic certainty, trying to control the uncontrollable. But these three, they're chaos. Joyful, messy, unpredictable chaos. And I don't want to control them. I just want to be near them." She was silent for a long moment. Then, "There's a PTA meeting Thursday. They're planning the spring garden. The kids want to grow sunflowers." He met her eyes. "Can I come?" She didn't say yes, didn't say no, just handed him a crumpled permission slip from Sophia's backpack. "Sign this. It's for the field trip to the Science Museum." His hand shook as he took the pen. Not from fear, but from the weight of something sacred. He signed his name, Daniel Hartwell. Not as a magnate, not as a ghost from the past, but as a man slowly earning his place in a story he'd once tried to erase. As he handed it back, Clara's fingers brushed his. Just for a second. And in that touch, he felt it, not forgiveness, not yet, but possibility. The kind that grows not from DNA, but from showing up. Clara opened before he could knock, as if she'd been watching through the curtains. She wore a faded sweater, hair loose, eyes wary but not closed. "You're early," she said. "I couldn't wait," he replied, voice low. She stepped aside without another word, and he entered the small house that now smelled of cinnamon, crayons, and the faint trace of wet dog. Lila had adopted a scruffy terrier from the shelter last month. The triplets were at school, but their presence was everywhere. Drawings taped to the fridge, tiny shoes by the door, a half-built Lego castle on the coffee table. He stood in the living room, suddenly unsure how to begin. Clara crossed her arms. "You look like you're about to hand me divorce papers." He almost smiled. "Worse, I'm handing you closure." He opened the folio and placed 3 documents on the table. Genovate is officially dissolved. All consumer DNA operations terminated. Client data sealed under federal ethics review. He paused. "And this?" He tapped the top sheet. "The Mendez Ethics Initiative. Fully funded. Independent board. Mission: to ensure no family is ever shamed, manipulated, or excluded from reproductive care because of profit, prejudice, or genetic dogma." Clara stared at the papers, then at him. "You named it after me. I owed you that much," he said. "You were right. Love doesn't need a genetic receipt, and science shouldn't be a weapon for the wealthy. This foundation, it's my apology. Not in words, in action." She didn't touch the documents. "Daniel, you don't have to buy your way back in." "I'm not," he said quickly. "This isn't for you. It's for every woman who's been told her love isn't enough because her body didn't cooperate. For every child labeled imperfect before they took their first breath. It's for them." He nodded toward the window, where the triplets' rain boots sat in a neat row. "So they never have to grow up in a world that measures worth by DNA." Her eyes glistened. She turned away, walking to the kitchen sink, gripping the edge like it might hold her up. "You really changed," she whispered. "I had to," he said, "because I saw what real strength looks like. It's not in controlling outcomes. It's in loving anyway. When the test fails, when the body betrays you, when the world calls your family a fraud." He took a step closer. "You showed me that, Clara, even when I didn't deserve to see it." She turned back, tears spilling over. "I was so angry at you, for years. Not just for leaving, but for making me feel like my love was a compromise." "I know," he said, voice breaking, "and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to undo that lie." Silence settled between them, thick with everything unsaid. Regret, hope, the fragile beginnings of trust. Then, from the hallway, a small voice. "Mama? Mr. Daniel?" They both turned. Mateo stood in the doorway, backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes wide. Behind him, Sophia and Lila peeked out, having been dropped off early due to a teacher meeting. "You're here," Lila said, beaming, and ran to Daniel, wrapping her arms around his legs. He knelt, hugging her gently. "I am." Sophia crossed her arms. "Did you bring more ducks?" He smiled faintly. "Not today, but I brought something better." He reached into his coat and pulled out 4 tickets. "The Natural History Museum has a new exhibit on constellations. Mateo said he wanted to see it. I thought maybe we could all go. Together." Clara looked at the tickets, then at her children's hopeful faces. "You're asking to spend the day with us," she said slowly. "I'm asking for a chance to be part of your world," he corrected. "Not as a savior, not as a father by law, just as someone who cares." Mateo stepped forward. "Will you tell me about the stars, Mr. Daniel?" "I'll try," Daniel said, "but I think your mama knows more." Clara looked at him, really looked, and for the first time he saw something new in her eyes. Not just caution, but possibility. She took the tickets from his hand. "We leave at 10, she said softly. "Don't be late." He nodded, heart swelling. "I won't." Clara walked slightly ahead, Sophia holding one hand, Lila skipping beside her, chattering about space butterflies. Mateo lingered near Daniel, eyes fixed on a scale model of the Orion Nebula. They say every star we see is already dead, Matteo said quietly. But we still look up. Daniel crouched beside him. Maybe we look up because hope outlives light. Matteo considered this, then nodded. Like us. Daniel's breath caught. Like you, he said softly. You're the kind of light that doesn't need to be real to be true. Clara glanced back, hearing the exchange. Her expression softened, just a fraction, but it was enough. Later, in the Hall of Human Origins, Sophia stopped in front of a display on ancient families. Mama, did people always have daddies? Clara knelt. Not always the same kind. Some had two mommies. Some had grandparents. Some had uncles or aunts who loved them like parents. Families are made in lots of ways. Even with wooden ducks? Lila asked, clutching the one Daniel had carved weeks ago. Especially with wooden ducks, Clara said, smiling. Daniel stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, watching them. He wanted to step closer, but didn't dare. Not yet. Then, as they passed the genetics exhibit, a new, ethically curated display funded by the Mendez Initiative, Clara paused. A placard read, DNA tells part of your story. Love writes the rest. She turned to him, eyes glistening. You did this. I wanted them to grow up in a world that sees them as whole, he said. She studied him for a long moment. Then, quietly, you can walk with us, Daniel. Not behind, not ahead. With, his chest tightened, he stepped forward, falling into step beside her. Their shoulders almost touched. At the cafe, over hot chocolate and peanut butter sandwiches, Lila slid into the booth next to him. Mr. Daniel, she said seriously, do you know how to braid hair? He blinked. I don't. I'll teach you, she declared, pulling out a pink hair tie. Sophia says only people who really care learn how. Before he could respond, she turned, presenting her back. Start with 3 pieces. He looked at Clara, uncertain. She nodded. Go on. Hands trembling slightly, he gathered Lila's fine hair, fumbling through the motions. Sophia giggled. Matteo offered quiet corrections. Clara watched, silent, as Daniel, once the architect of genetic perfection, struggled to braid a child's hair with clumsy, tender fingers. When he finished, it was lopsided, but Lila beamed in the reflection of a spoon. It's perfect. That word, perfect, used not for symmetry or code, but for effort, for presence, for love. Later, as they walked back to the car, the sun dipping low, Clara slowed her pace. You're not trying to replace anyone, she said, voice low. Are you? No, he said immediately. I'm not here to be their father in the way the world defines it. I'm here to be someone they can count on. Someone who shows up when it's hard. Someone who carves ducks, braids hair, and sits through plays, even when he doesn't belong. She stopped walking, turned to face him. You belong more than you think. He searched her eyes. Do you mean that? I mean, they've started asking for you, she admitted, voice cracking. Not Mr. Daniel, just Daniel. When they draw family pictures, they leave a space. Not for a ghost, for someone who's trying. He swallowed hard. I don't deserve that space. Maybe not, she said gently, but you're earning it. They stood there, the golden light wrapping around them like a promise. Then, from the back seat, Sophia called out, Are we going home now? Clara smiled. Yes, sweetheart. As they drove away, Daniel in the passenger seat for the first time, Lila asleep against the window, Matteo sketching the sunset, Sophia humming softly. Clara reached over and turned off the radio. In the quiet, she said, There's a parent-teacher conference next week. They want to talk about Matteo's advanced science aptitude. He's been asking if you'd come. Daniel looked at her, heart full. I'll be there. He'd been coming every weekend now. Not as a guest, not as an intruder, but as someone who belonged in the rhythm of their lives. He'd fixed the porch step, read bedtime stories over video call when he was in the city, even learned to make Lila's favorite banana pancakes. Burnt the first 3 times, perfect by the 7th, but today felt different. As he knelt to untangle a hose, Matteo wandered over, crouching beside him, dirt smudged on his cheek. He was quiet for a long moment, watching a ladybug crawl across Daniel's knuckle. Then, softly, "Are you our dad?" Daniel froze. "Not Mr. Daniel. Not that man. That..." His breath caught. He set the hose down slowly, turning to face the boy whose eyes held the weight of a question too big for his small chest. He could lie. He could deflect. He could say the safe thing, "I'm your friend." But he owed Matteo more than safety. He owed him truth. "No, Matteo," he said gently, voice rough with emotion. "I'm not your dad. Not by blood. Not by law. Your real dad is someone kind and brave who gave you life when your mama needed help. I don't know his name, but I'm grateful to him every day." Matteo frowned, digging a small hole with his finger. "Then why do you stay?" "Because I love you," Daniel said, the words raw, unguarded. "Not because you're mine, but because you're you. And because your mama showed me that love isn't about ownership. It's about showing up, even when you're scared, even when you don't deserve it." Matteo looked up, eyes wide. "Do you love mama too?" Daniel's heart cracked open. "I always have," he admitted. "But I didn't know how to love her right. I confused control for care, perfection for love. She taught me that real love means letting people be imperfect and loving them anyway." Just then, Sophia stomped over, hands on hips. "Lila says you're our new daddy. Is that true?" Before Daniel could answer, Lila appeared behind her, clutching her stuffed rabbit, eyes wide with hope. "Are you?" He looked at all three of them. Sophia's fierce gaze, Matteo's quiet intensity, Lila's trembling lip, and felt the weight of a lifetime in that moment. He knelt in the dirt, meeting them at eye level. "I can't be your daddy the way other kids have daddies," he said, voice breaking. "But if you'll let me, I'd like to try being someone who's always in your corner. Someone who comes to your plays, helps with homework, braids Lila's hair, even if it's crooked, and tells Matteo about the stars. Someone who loves your mama the way she deserves to be loved." He paused, tears glistening. "I won't always get it right, but I'll never walk away again." Silence hung in the air, thick with the scent of turned earth and blooming hope. Then Lila stepped forward and took his hand. "You can be our Daniel," she said simply. "That's enough." Sophia crossed her arms, but her eyes softened. "Only if you promise to keep making wooden ducks." "I promise," he whispered. Matteo studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a smooth river stone, placing it in Daniel's palm. "This is for your pocket," he said. "So you remember you belong here." Daniel closed his fingers around the stone, warm from Matteo's touch. Felt like an anchor, like a vow. Clara stood by the porch steps, watching, tears streaming silently down her face. She didn't interrupt, didn't correct, just let the moment breathe. Because in that garden, among sunflowers yet to bloom, something far more precious had taken root. Not a legal title, not a genetic claim, but a choice, made by three small hearts who'd seen his brokenness. And he was here to ask. Clara opened the door before he could knock, as if she'd been waiting. She wore a soft sweater, hair loose, eyes knowing. Behind her, the triplets were in the living room. Sophia reading aloud to Lila, Matteo sketching by lamplight. "You look nervous," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "I am," he admitted. "More than the day I launched Genovate." She smiled faintly. "Come in." He stepped inside, the warmth of the house wrapping around him like an embrace. The children looked up and Lila beamed. "Daniel, you came for story time." "I did," he said, but his eyes stayed on Clara. Later, after bedtime stories and toothbrushing and Lila's third request for water, the house fell quiet. Clara made tea, and they sat at the kitchen table, steam curling between them like unspoken words. "You've been different," she said finally. "Not just with them, with me." "I'm trying to be honest," he said. "Not perfect, just real." She wrapped her hands around her mug. "And what do you want, Daniel?" "Truly," he took a slow breath. "I want to build something real with you. Not because of the children, though they're the reason I found my way back, but because I never stopped loving you. Even when I was cruel, even when I was blind, you were the only truth I ever ran from, and the only one worth returning to. Her eyes filled. It's not that simple. We're not the same people we were. I know, he said. You're stronger, wiser. You built a world without me, and I don't expect you to hand me a key just because I've changed my mind. Then why are you here? She whispered. Because I choose you, he said, voice raw. Not the woman I thought you should be. Not the wife who fit my perfect plan. You, the woman who raised 3 miracles alone. Who stood on a stage and told the world that love is enough. Who still leaves the porch light on when I'm late. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I was so angry for so long. I know, he said, and you have every right to be. But if you're willing, I'd like to earn your trust. Not as a grand gesture. Not as a billionaire with a redemption arc. Just as a man who loves you and your children with everything he has left. She looked at him for a long time, searching his face for the old arrogance, the cold calculation. But all she saw was humility and hope and a love that had been forged in fire and silence. Then, quietly, there's a school winter concert next month. They're singing Silent Night. Lila's nervous. She says she'll only go on stage if you're in the front row. He nodded. I'll be there. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. And after, he turned his hand, lacing his fingers with hers, tentatively, reverently. After, I'd like to take you to dinner. Just us. No agenda, no past. Just 2 people who've been through hell and somehow found their way back to each other. She squeezed his hand. Okay. Just that one word, okay. And the world shifted. Not because the wounds were gone, not because the past was erased, but because they'd chosen, together, to write a new chapter, not defined by DNA, not bound by old roles, but built on something far more enduring. Forgiveness. The Mendez Ethics Initiative was receiving its first National Science Advocacy Award, and the triplets, now 6, were being honored as young ambassadors of inclusive science. As the presenter called their names, Lila clutched Daniel's sleeve. What if I trip? She whispered. You won't, he said softly, kneeling. And if you do, I'll be right behind you, like always. She nodded, then took Sophia's hand. Mateo adjusted his tiny blazer and gave Daniel a look that said, We've got this. They walked to the stage together, 3 small figures radiating courage, followed by 2 adults who'd once been shattered by pride and silence, now stitched back together by grace. After the ceremony, as guests mingled under crystal chandeliers, a reporter approached Clara. Ms. Mendez, your story changed how the world sees genetic ethics. But some still ask, wasn't using donor sperm without your husband's knowledge a form of deception? Clara didn't flinch. She glanced at Daniel, then at her children, now laughing near the dessert table, Lila trying to balance a cupcake on her brother's head. Deception is hiding truth to harm, she said calmly. I hid nothing to hurt Daniel. I acted out of love because I believed, even when he couldn't, that a family could be built on more than DNA. And look, she gestured to the trio. They're proof that it can. The reporter turned to Daniel. Mr. Hartwell, you once called that act biological fraud. Now you fund a foundation in your ex-wife's name and raise her children as your own. What changed? Daniel looked at Clara, then at the children, his children in every way that mattered now, and his voice was thick with emotion. I confused control for love, he said. I thought blood was the only truth that mattered, but they taught me otherwise. He nodded toward Lila, who was now showing a waiter how to properly hold a cupcake. She doesn't carry my genes, but she carries my heart, and that's the only inheritance I care about. Later, as snow fell gently outside, the 5 of them stepped into the quiet night. The city glittered, but none of them looked back at the ballroom, the cameras, the headlines. They walked to the car together, Clara and Daniel side by side, the triplets skipping ahead, breath visible in the cold air. Mama, Sophia called, turning. Can we get hot chocolate after this? And marshmallows, Lila added. Mateo looked at Daniel. Will you tell us about the stars again? Daniel smiled, opening the car door for Clara. Only if you promise to correct me when I get it wrong. As they drove through the snowlit streets, Lila curled against Daniel's shoulder, already half asleep, Sophia chattering about constellations, Mateo sketching the moon through the window. Clara reached across the console and laced her fingers with Daniel's. No words were needed, because the title that once defined their tragedy, Magnate for falsified DNA, left his wife. 3 years later, he saw her with triplets at an event, had long since lost its sting. It wasn't about falsified DNA anymore. It was about reclaimed truth. Not the kind written in chromosomes, but the kind lived in daily choices. To stay when it's hard, to forgive when it's deserved, to love when logic says it's impossible. Daniel had once believed legacy was inherited. Now he knew it's built. In wooden ducks and braided hair, in school plays and winter concerts, in a mother's unwavering love and a man's hard-won humility, in 3 children who never asked for perfection, only presence. And as the car turned onto their street, the porch light glowing warm against the snow, Daniel finally understood the deepest truth of all. Family isn't found in A.